Hello, I'm Representative Danny Davis from the 7th District of Illinois, and I welcome you to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative virtual conference 2020. Today's discussion is a very important one, and I want to thank the SAFER Foundation, first of all, for being our chief and primary sponsor. They are one of the oldest, largest, and most effective organizations that I know anything about in the United States of America dealing with the issue of reentry. Today's discussion is a very important one. It is important, and especially as we look at quality of life indicators and work towards making improvements of all the problems, of all the needs affecting negatively the quality of life for African Americans. I cannot think of any one issue, any one problem, nor more detrimental than mass incarceration. Our country, the United States of America, have more of its people locked up or incarcerated than any other nation on the face of the earth. Now that we know it, the bigger question though becomes, what are we doing about it, and what are we prepared to do about it? My mother was fond of saying that an ounce of prevention was worth much more than a pound of cure. I agree. I generally always agreed with my mother, and I acknowledge that good parents, good neighborhoods, good schools, good health care, recreational programs, good teachers, livable wages, all of these amenities of a good life will help. However, I do believe that we can do both at the same time, and we are fortunate to have a panel of experts who can and will describe some of those things that are indeed working. Our focus today is what really works for reentry. And so we are pleased to have Dr. Nicole Jarrett, who directs the Corrections and Reentry Division at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, where she leads the center's program and policy efforts to promote the successful reentry of people leaving jail and prisons and improve institutional and community corrections practices. As the National Reentry Resource Center Director, she oversaw training and technical assistance to agencies and community-based organizations implementing federally supported reentry initiatives. Previously, Dr. Jarrett served as the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Medical Association and has over 20 years of experience in community-based harm reduction, public health, and evaluation. She received her doctorate's degree in health policy and management from the Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she has done a postdoctoral fellowship in behavioral health services and criminal justice research at Rutgers University. Doctor, it is so good to have you, and would you begin, Dr. Jarrett?
Yes, thank you, Representative Davis. Pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to be able to talk about what works and when we talk about reentry. And I think it's helpful to always acknowledge that there has been a lot of progress that's been made around the field of reentry, even in the past decade. And when I think about the modern day reentry movement, the Second Chance Act, has been a significant touch point in that. And so we're in a place in which we, acknowledge that reentry, the importance of reentry and recidivism reduction efforts on all different levels of government and nonprofits, what works to reduce reentry and changing perceptions and behavior is now more commonly understood. We still struggle a little bit sometimes with resources and implementation, but really being in this place in which we are having agencies identifying reentry as a core goal, even departments of corrections identifying that as a core goal, is a really significant progress forward. And I do thank you, Representative Davis, for your leadership when it comes to the second chance work. When we think about the core things that work in reentry, employment, of course, comes top of mind. And employment really being one of the pillars around when we talk about economic mobility, that when we are looking at people returning, there sometimes is a tendency to be thinking about just immediate interventions. But if we have a long range view around economic mobility and thinking about not just thinking about education, getting a job, but then also career, it's really helpful because we know the science does tell us that recidivism, the likelihood of you continuing the cycle of reincarceration goes down considerably if we hold the pillar of economic mobility and employment and education as a high priority. And so when we think about economic mobility, we need to be thinking about we need to be thinking about the skill set. So making sure that there's training opportunities, education opportunities, pre-release from jail and prisons, and then also in the community. Communities that have been really successful in this have had really strong dynamic partnerships with departments of corrections and community colleges and community-based providers to be helping to really think about individuals as a whole and really being supportive in a holistic way. So thinking about equipping the skill set of people coming back into community. Also, there's a real tough landscape out there, even if you have the skill set to get jobs. And there's a number of regulatory barriers, thousands of regulatory barriers that prevent people from getting jobs. And so addressing that on a state level and where appropriate on the local level, jurisdictions that do that are in a much better place to be able to more effectively support people that are going through reentry. And then also, of course, addressing the supply side around employers. And how do you engage employers to address risks, perceived risks that they may have around employing people who may have a criminal record. And so, having a three-pronged approach around economic mobility is really key in order to help advance reentry outcomes. Housing, still one of the toughest areas that people who are working in reentry keep coming across over and over again. And so we know that many people coming into correctional facilities have low, often are not, are often homeless, and then, facing significant barriers when they're released. This is a great opportunity, again, for agencies to communicate with one another, address what the barriers are, being really clear on where the law stands, and helping to facilitate that, those type of movements. Family support being critical as well, and really seeing family support as a critical asset. But at the same time, families often need support, whether it's counseling and training, so they can be supportive to individuals that are coming and returning. One of the things that's always tough around reentry is that there is no one system that owns reentry. It's not very clear about how much money is going into reentry within a particular state. There's not a lot of accountability when it comes to reentry. The measures around reentry is really hard to ascertain, so it's hard to track progress. Seeing jurisdictions develop reentry councils and task force in a more holistic strategic planning and system-wide approach to think about, not to identify the populations, to understand where the needs are, where the resources are, using some reentry mapping in that way. Those jurisdictions are in a much better position to be able to intervene to get better outcomes. And that involves local leadership, state leadership, because as I mentioned earlier, some of the barriers that the reentry population is facing are occurring on the state level. It's working with local facilities, it's working with jails and prisons, it's understanding the needs of special populations as well, whether it's women or young people, and really understanding what that transition process looks like, and being able to address those needs as quickly as possible, but in a strategic way. And we're in a really unique period of time with the challenges around COVID. We know that reentry service providers are hit particularly hard, that people are being released at a greater rate for social distancing and safety reasons. And at the same time, reentry service providers are closing down and halting essential services. And so we should see this as an opportunity for agencies to coordinate, and really seeing co-responsibility for populations as they're moving from one system to the other. And so as they're moving from a correctional system, what are health and human services, social services doing during the reentry process to ensure that people remain safe, that people are getting the services that they need, if they have complex needs, that they're being addressed as well. And so this is a time in which we can celebrate how far we've come, but we're also in a space in which, after seeing a bunch of different programs that have found some successes, how do we bring that to scale and through really strategic, systematic approaches? And then during this unique time around the COVID pandemic, how do we shore up our safety net through partnerships and collaborations that will serve us well into the future?
Thank you very much, Dr. Jarrett. We certainly appreciate those insights and appreciate your being with us. We'll go now to our next presenter, who, although he looks extremely young, but he's not as young as he looks, but he is young. Mr. Jason St. Julian is an assistant United States attorney in Denver, Colorado. He works in the violent crimes and immigration enforcement sections of the criminal division and has received 2 United States Attorneys Awards of Excellence for his work. He is a former teacher and was acknowledged as Teacher of the Year in 2007. So, Attorney Julian, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for being here. Look, you could be anywhere else, doing anything else but this, and you chose to be with us. Maybe you had to rearrange your schedule to make it work. So whatever you did, whatever you had to handle to be here, I thank you for that, because your individual presence makes a difference on this panel. Reentry. What really works? I say that what works is interacting with incarcerated persons as human beings. You know, not something less than, or someone less than, or some number or statistic. And if we are to even have a shot at making a difference, that's what we have to do. Now, you may ask, well, why is that the case? I say that's the case because right now, incarcerated persons experience themselves a certain way. That I say they experience themselves that they don't make a difference, that they don't matter, like they don't have an impact in the world and with the people that they're around. And look, if we take no action in this area, this specific context, we're going to get what we already have. You know, I received some information, some statistics in preparation for this. There's over 650,000 individuals that will leave prison and enter the community this year. And within 3 years, over 50% will be homeless. Over 50% will be rearrested. Over 50% will be unemployed. Like, that's what we already have, and that's the future we're living into. Now, I've created a program that provides the opportunity for incarcerated persons to experience themselves as they matter, that they make a difference with themselves and every single person they interact with. It's called the At Last program. And what we do is we go into the Federal Correctional Institute in Inglewood, Colorado, and we interact and have a program with incarcerated persons at the camp. Now, the camp is the lowest level of security at that specific institution. And myself and my good friend Earl Johnson, we facilitate a 3-hour program. We facilitate 2 conversations and then an exercise. The first conversation is about listening. And we ask the incarcerated persons to just consider that they've never really listened to anyone in their life. And that's not good, bad, right, or wrong. That just you haven't listened to someone with the intent to understand, to leave that other person having the experience of being heard and understood. Because as human beings, that's all we want. We all want to be heard and understood. And when you approach a conversation that way, what is the possibility now? The second conversation we have is called the domains of humanity. And we ask the incarcerated persons to consider that, look, we all walk around as human beings as though, well, I can't relate to this person and I can't communicate with this person because I'm not from where they're from. And I don't do what they do. And I don't look like them. And that's an absolute barrier to relationships with people and making a difference. And we ask them to consider that, look, we all have the same concerns. They just show up differently because of our life's experiences, and that we don't have to do anything else. We don't have to say anything else. We don't have to get anywhere else, or we don't have to have anything else. We, right now, like you on this camera, we are already and always related by the mere fact that we are human beings. And when you enter a conversation, a relationship like that, now what's possible? And we end the program with an exercise called the Be With exercise, where we line the inmates up. They're standing about 2 or 3 feet apart, hands to their side, no talking. And the only part of the program is that you just look into your partner's eyes. Now, I know what you're saying. That's not a normal way of being for incarcerated persons, that they don't look people in the eyes. And that's one of the reasons why we do this. And what we have found, depending on how long we do this, is that once the original awkwardness goes away, that what shows up for these individuals is that, wow, that's actually another human being standing in front of me. And then when that subsides, what shows up is, I actually see myself in that person standing in front of me. And all the thoughts and all the ideas and all the concepts that I had about who they were, they fall away and disappear. And then they have the experience of actually being seen by another person. And then we have them sit down and we ask them what showed up for them. And what results do we get? The results are that they don't want us to leave. They want us to come back. They are requesting that we go into the prison to the higher level security parts and present the program to them. That we've had an older white male stand up and say, look, I've been racist my entire life and I know it's wrong. And he stands up and apologizes to a Native American saying, I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for what I've said and what I haven't done. And then he gets up and hugs my co-facilitator, Earl Johnson, who's another black man, and says, if my friends knew I was hugging a black man, they would disown me. Like, that's the results that we get. And I'm not saying that this is the way to do reentry. It's just a way. That when you interact with individuals from the level of a human being, and they're heard and understood, and they have the experience that they matter, that's how we make the difference. Because we can provide all the tools and supplies that we want. And if that person has that, but they have no sense of self-worth, they have no sense of direction, and they don't think they don't matter, those tools aren't going to make the difference. So I ask everyone out there to consider that and see if it works. So I thank you for everything that you're doing. I thank you for who you are for everyone you work with. I thank you for who you are for the world. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
Well, Jason, thank you. And thank you for the perspective that you give, because I agree that everything begins with self. And if self can be expressed in a certain kind of way, and I'm sure that our next presenter has had many of those interactions with individuals who were incarcerated, because Rob Jeffries is a nationally recognized criminal justice expert with correctional experience spanning more than 20 years. He spent 24 years in the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections before becoming Director of Corrections for the state of Illinois. He was in charge of 8 adult prisons in Ohio and managed a budget of $350 million. He holds both a bachelor's and a Master of Science degree in criminal justice. And Director Jeffries, we're so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Congressman Davis, and I appreciate being part of this meaningful conversation on what really works. For corrections, it's all about dedication, assessing what your problems are, programming, collaboration, and hard discussions. I first want to highlight the Illinois Department of Corrections did not have a dedicated reentry office when I took this position back in June of 2019. We since formed a reentry division and hired a manager for that division, as well as other management staff to serve in it. Now it's our goal as Illinois Department of Corrections to provide a holistic approach to preparing men and women in our care for successful reentry into the community. And you know what, this begins at the incarceration's individual's admission into IDOC and continues throughout his or her supervision. So it's important to have a reentry planning that will address individuals' criminogenic needs, risk factors, programming needs, community linkage needs, and the appropriate supervision level activities that's subsequent needed upon release. As far as release, back in 2019, we released over about 23,000 men and women for IDOC, and the majority of them was placed in approved host sites. But we can do better for about 1,200 special populations who were not able to find or secure approved host sites due to their convictions and due to their mental health needs and their substance abuse disorders. So we're making that a top priority here at IDOC to better evaluate and address the needs of our population. And put it simply, I mean, we haven't done enough to assess the risk factors and the needs of our population. I mean, this includes our mandatory supervised release, as well as those currently in incarceration and those who are in parole that are receiving some type of programming. We're actively working to roll out a risk and needs assessment that we would deliver to our entire population. I mean, this assessment will drive facility placement, programming needs and reentry planning, which is so important. The risk assessment will be conducted to, look at social programmatic needs of individuals in custody, utilize this information for the staff to come up with like a men and women to determine their case plan that addresses individual needs. The assessment will guide us and, also help us with conditions of confinement or conditions of parole, as well as the level of supervision. So everybody's not being supervised the same way. This would help allow parole staff to divert higher supervision needs and case management to those who have the highest need upon their release based on their risk and needs assessment. Most importantly, we want to empower the men and women to make positive choices and gain some independence while supporting them throughout their education and clinical programming and vocational training. So we believe with the right programming, IDOC, we can make a holistic approach to approve and support the returning citizens. What we're committed in including the men and women in custody in the current discussions of social justice initiatives as well through focus groups and town halls and quality of life committees. Focus groups are a great way to allow the men and women to share their concerns and work together with appropriate staff to bring about resolutions. Just in one of our facilities in Kiwani, we have an offender newsletter called Two Roads that we provide to the population with a platform to write and share stories and testimony on news, health, and currently, the current affairs on racism. This newsletter, we make it available for the entire population using tablets and, posted in common areas. With this response to our current pandemic, we identified the need to increase the use of technology for communication and program delivery throughout our department. And I might add that this past year, IDOC, in partnership with Congressman Danny Davis, we was able to hold our first virtual Father's Day program for the men in our custody. This program was an opportunity to hear from our family members, from the men, to hear from their family members and the community partners who will be instrumental in their successful reentry. And as part of the program, I personally got involved. I was interviewed by the editor of the Two Roads newsletter to share my personal experience about being a father, and also to talk about some of the current social issues as well around racism. So, I talked about, working together in collaboration. So we established a strong working relationship with some other state agencies to ensure that, we're providing, people leaving our custody that have access and participate in other state funded and federal funded programs. I'll highlight a couple. We're currently providing Medicaid to those who are leaving our custody. So we work with the Department of Human Services to launch a pilot program in our women's division in Lincoln to enroll them in SNAP prior to the release. So now we have women leaving the facility with tangible resources that would help ease the stress of returning home and providing for their families. So, working with other state agencies, DHS and IDOC, we're also exploring increasing collaborations around some mental health and health services as well, around, affording an opportunity for people who qualify for services from the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. We also worked in partnership with Lieutenant Governor Stratton in the Illinois Housing Department Authority. We launched a reentry rental housing support demonstration program. It was an interagency initiative designed to meet some housing needs as people are exiting our facilities, as Dr. Jarrett pointed out earlier how important that is. We hope with these two pilots, we can scale it to a more that can address a bigger part of the population and lead with these type of collaboration, it will lead to some stronger cross-agency partnership so we can better serve our population. Also want to highlight, I want to make sure that we highlight that we're also slated to get a little over $9 million in assistance from the U.S. Department of Justice. And we're planning to use this funding to expand our housing placements for people coming out as well. And specifically, we intend to use some of this funds to for placement of people with mental health concerns. Those are the hardest to place, as well as enhance our ability to serve people with substance abuse disorders in the community. We also use some of this money, there's areas in the state that lack transitional housing. So we want to be able to provide that opportunity for them as well too. And finally, I'll touch on some of the previous comments. Employers, must recognize the value in our returning citizens. People are very reluctant to hire previously incarcerated people. They want assurances, they want to allow, they want to rule out people based on their conviction history. But we all need to push back on this type of thinking, provide more opportunities for our returning citizens. While people will leave, facilities and prisons, they all have complex needs, but some of them, majority of them just need high quality chance to, help them stabilize their lives. I would also add that all organizations working within this criminal justice space can benefit from serving from a wider cross section of returning citizens. And I'm talking about those with those complex needs, those mental health illnesses, substance abuse issues. We can't afford to have people rule out of the programs because of the nature of the crime they went to prison for. And when they're back in the community, they deserve a fair chance at life since they've served out their sentence. So once again, thank you for this meaningful conversation. I'm glad to be part of it.
Well, thank you, and thank you so very much. And especially do I want to thank you for that Father's Day family reconnection collaboration. I had a lot of fun and truly enjoyed it myself. I think that people come to reentry from various ways and various walks of life. Our next presenter, Victor Dixon, is president and CEO of the SAFER Foundation, one of the oldest, largest, and most effective organizations in the United States of America dealing with reentry. Before becoming president and CEO of SAFER, Victor spent more than 20 years in executive management positions in corporate American companies like AT&T and Sprint. He is a graduate of Roosevelt University, is an ordained minister, spent 6 years working with a mega church, and has a tremendous amount of experience with public policy, not only decision-making, but implementation. And Victor, we thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Well, Congressman, I want to thank you and thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for once again having a panel on criminal justice reform. Hopefully you can hear me well. Good. So I want to first and would never go any further without thanking Congressman Davis. He is the father of the second chance. Way before anybody was thinking about this issue, he was advocating for people to have a second chance. And it's interesting now when you see both Democrats and Republicans both supporting issues around criminal justice reform. And I also want to thank the other panelists, our partner in Illinois, Director Jeffries. We're excited that he's in our state. He inherited a difficult situation and is trying to really transform it from the inside out, and we appreciate that. And my colleague, George Williams, he also was a person that was working with Congressman Davis in the early days on the Second Chance Act, and I want to salute him for being another one of the fathers of the second chance. So as Congressman Davis mentioned, our organization has been around since 1972. We serve about 6,000 people per year in Illinois and Iowa. We work with people pre-release in 2 work release centers that we operate on behalf of the Illinois Department of Corrections. We have programs in Cook County Jail in Chicago. And then we work with people post-release in the community around Illinois and Iowa. And I would say, you know, to answer the question of what works, everybody has touched on, and there's been a common theme, which is around the holistic, comprehensive nature of what we need to do to support people. But I would say the first thing of what works is realizing the magnitude of the problem that we have in the US, 70 million people, probably now with some sort of arrest or conviction record. Illinois is 4.2 million people in a state that only has 12.8 million people. We're going to release a report next month about the city of Chicago that will probably show that 1/3 of the residents in the city of Chicago have an arrest or conviction record. That's really important because all of the other issues that we talk about, socioeconomic issues, poverty, jobs, homelessness, housing instability, drug abuse, mental illness, the super utilizers of emergency room and hospital resources, they're disproportionately people with records. And why that's important is, number one, we need to scale things up to the level and the volume of work that needs to be done and the number of people that need to be addressed. And secondly, if we can realize that the most effective way to address our socioeconomic problems is to focus on this population, because we will kill 4 or 5 birds with one stone if we work with them. So for us, Nicole, Mr. St. Julian, Director Jeffries all mentioned holistic. A holistic approach is really critical because people come to us with a wide range of needs, but they also come to us with assets. So it's a combination of trying to address their needs in a holistic fashion. That could be healthcare, that could be mental health care, it could be housing, certainly education, employment, but connecting them to public benefits like SNAP and Medicaid, making sure they have a state ID, making sure they have some resources for transportation. All of those things are really critical to a person's success. But the thing that we've seen also that works well is when we realize that people have assets. They don't just come to us with needs, they have assets. What we say to them is that, look, you came to us needing an asset, but when you finally realize and awaken to the fact that you are an asset, you'll be able to get all the other assets that you need. So that asset-based approach is very important, and we've used that and asked people, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take it? And our job is to try to help them get to where they want to go. And we've seen some of the greatest success when people have been connected to careers that they've always wanted. They wanted to be in construction. They wanted to work in healthcare. They wanted to work in computer science in those fields. And their recidivism rates reflected 9% rates, 5% rates, and less when they get connected to the kind of thing that really helps them take advantage of the assets they have. I would say that what works is sealing records, expunging records, because the record is what creates barriers for people in housing, in education, in jobs. And anything we can do to get those records sealed will help. So we are hoping that at some point we would embrace in our country a national piece of legislation around sealing records. The research shows that people who at 5 years or less after a supervision are no more likely to commit a crime or be convicted of a crime than a person who was never, ever convicted of a crime. So why do we punish people for the rest of their lives? We're hoping we could at some point have a national record law on sealing records. But holistic, that's the thing. Meeting all of the needs, realizing people have assets, helping them get stable in their lives, and helping to move on to do things that they want in their heart to do, that our country needs in terms of workforce. That is something that we see as working.
Thank you very much, Victor. And of course, as always, you kind of hit the nail on the head. a good part of understanding reentry is understanding it from those individuals who've been through it. George Williams is the epitome of an individual who was not always what he is. George is the vice president of a large organization that provides services not only to people in the United States, but abroad. George has traveled throughout the world, providing consultant services and training for individuals dealing with reentry. Tell us what helped you, George. How did you get to be vice president of treatment alternatives for safe communities?
Thank you, Congressman. Probably through the grace of God, first and foremost. But let me say to my co-panelists, as well as to you, Congressman, that let me make this very clear. The Second Chance Act, I believe, that you, Chief Co-Sponsor, will go down in history as one of the most important piece of legislation that was developed and passed in this time. You created a pathway and a proclamation that you made a statement to the country that these United States are going to support men and women that find themselves trying to find their way back and take their rightful place first within themselves and within their respective communities and families. I've spent a lot of years in my life in the streets and in institutions. I can tell you about what it is to be in correctional systems, from Georgia chain gangs to Mexican jails to being arrested in Thailand. And one of my most awakening moments was in the Department of Corrections in Illinois, in Joliet, where I tell you, in a hot summer night, I knew that it was over, that I had to come and find the George within my own truth center and make the decision that it was time to change my life. And in that moment was when I found that moment. TAS is a statewide organization that provides innumerable numbers of services across the state. We work very closely with the Department of Corrections. And Mr. Director Jeffrey, we stand with you in everything that you want to do within that department. And as it relates, and I want to just say something to the men and women that have lived experiences and returning citizens. Believe this, that in life, you find what you're looking for because what you're looking for is looking for you. And if you change your thoughts, you can change your world. And there's an array and host of help out here to support you in that journey. And with that, I know that we're up against time. I'm going to end it there, sir. But thank you, sir, for your leadership. And thank you for your dedication and your commitment to this work.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I know that Victor mentioned you as one of the fathers of the Second Chance Act. We thank you for serving as the co-chair of our reentry task force for, I guess, the last 15, 20 years or so. And that's pretty good. Of course, our last presenter is Tiama Romero, who was there when we conceptualized Second Chance, helped write it, helped facilitate passage of it, was actually present when President Bush signed it and was at the signing ceremony, and is still involved in doing research on reentry as part of her dissertation for a doctoral degree. So Tiama, you get to wrap us up with some questions and things that people can buy into.
Okay, thank you very much, Congressman Davis, for convening this conference on reentry. I remember when we had our very first conference, it had to be 15 years ago, on reentry. I think you mentioned it the other day. We were engaged in conversation for about 8 hours. We actually almost missed the gala. I've been listening intently to what everybody has to say, and some of my questions are around those issues that you guys have pointed out. But as a way of providing an opportunity for the viewers and the audience, we would like to ask the following questions. In terms of defining reentry, what I've learned through my studies is that there are various definitions about reentry. Some of them are inclusive and some of them are not. And so I just want us to look at that. Some people say reentry is the process of leaving prison and returning to free society, except for those prisoners who are executed or die from natural causes. All prisoners experience reentry. Reentry is neither a legal status nor a form of supervision. Even those prisoners who are released straight to the streets without being placed on parole experience reentry. But I want us to talk about people who may not have been a prisoner, maybe been arrested, and Victor, you talked about these people, who still somehow have an X on their back. They've been arrested, charged, but never convicted, but still have an X. Do you think those individuals should be officially included in legislation and programs designed to help ex-offenders? So based on the previous definitions, they wouldn't be included in those definitions as an ex-offender, but they still suffer the consequences of ex-offenders. The second question is the minimum wage, and I'm gonna really, there's been ongoing discussion over the last decade or so to pay prisoners the minimum wage. In fact, this prison policy group found that some prisoners are paid less than they were in 2001, from 96 cents to 83 cents. If prisoners were paid the minimum wage, they could substantially contribute to their reentry costs. In Massachusetts, for example, at least half of each paycheck goes into a savings account to pay for expenses after release. So there is already a reentry fund model. Do you think that prisoners should receive the minimum wage while in prison, incarcerated? The third thing I think that we need to consider every time we think about developing legislation or program activity, how these four areas fit in. Some advocates and policymakers have long discussed how to reintegrate individuals back into society successfully. And there are four areas, individual characteristics, family relationships. We've all talked about all of these things, and Jason, your program fits the context of all of these. Community context, Rob, yours does too, and state policies. I believe that in order to successfully for people to successfully reenter society, we need to look beyond just recidivism, because we all know that recidivism has remained the same or has increased in some instances. But we sometimes forget about the main things that we need to do and not just focus on recidivism. We focus on those four areas specifically, we may reduce recidivism. So do you think we need to improve the work we are doing in these areas? Individual characteristics, and Jason, you mentioned, and how people feel about themselves, how they internalize, whether they were on drugs or something like that. Family relationships, the Congressman, you mentioned and Rob, you mentioned Director Jeffries, you mentioned the fatherhood initiatives, community contacts, how people reintegrate back. Who's helping them, how are they fitting into society, and state policies, expungement policies, all these other things that we've been talking about today. Everything that typically goes on with a person that's trying to reenter society could fit into those categories. And we need to really strategically figure out how we design policies and programs if we can include all four areas. And then the last issue is cash bail. Should individuals be held in jail for minor offenses simply because they don't have bail? And that would be my last question. That is maybe about 100 years ago when cash bail was originally thought of, somebody in the community could vouch for them and they would be released. Just somebody their neighbor could say, oh, I know him, he's not gonna run away or she's not gonna run away, and they could be released just on the basis of a community support. We have to think about other ways to get people out of jail and without having them pay large amounts of money that they don't have. The prison policy Institute also did a study on this, indicating that if you're an African American and you're making $15,000 a year or less, how can you afford cash bail? If it's $10,000 or even $1,000, how can you afford it? So that would be the final questions that we invite individuals to respond to us, the audience, viewers, the panelists, by emailing me at tumiaromero@gmail.com. I'm actually going to change my name here to my email so we can do that. We can't use our political or our government email addresses for this, so we'll use this one. So those are the 4 questions, and there could be many, many more. I think that we intuitively think that we're covering all these things, but when you start researching and you realize we're covering 1 or 2, but we're not covering them all together.
I think probably right on time. And let me thank all of the panelists for your involvement, for your engagement, for the wisdom that you've shared with all of the rest of us. And we encourage individuals who are viewing, if you've got a response to either one of the questions, please let us know. Or if you've got a question for one of the panelists that they didn't get a chance to answer or to explore because of the pandemic and the way in which we've had to do this, just get that information to us. We will get it to them and try and get you an answer. I agree with everybody who've suggested that we are making progress, but I never want to get to the basement and act like I'm in the penthouse. So even though we're making some progress, we still have a long way to go. And this issue confronts obviously some population groups more than it does others. But if we can wrap our minds around it, give our thoughts to it, then I think we're going to help America become a better, more progressive nation, and we will become the America that never has been and yet must be. I close with thinking of one of my favorite poets who was fond of talking about dreaming. And he talked a lot about dreams. One of the things he said was, hold fast to your dreams, for if dreams die, life becomes as a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to your dreams and don't let go, for if you let go, life becomes as a barren field covered with snow. So those who believe that we can reform our criminal justice system to make it more proactive, just keep dreaming, but work at the same time. So thank you all so much. It's been wonderful. I can't appreciate enough your taking the time to share this time with us. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you somewhere on the trail, maybe at one of those institutions, visiting inmates, so doing what we do. So have a good one, and thank you all so much.